folks.
Eastgate is closed.
I now call this meeting of the Silver Falls School District Board of Directors to order. And the attendance is noted. All 7 members are present in the room. And we are now going to move into executive session under ORS 192.6602E to conduct deliberations to negotiate real property transactions. So those in the audience, we will be back. I don't have an estimated time though, but we'll, all right, thank you.
30 to 45.
Okay, 30 to 45 minutes.
Yep.
And I'm going to read this because I think Stephen's staying in the room. The blah, 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 blah. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on or otherwise disclose any of the deliberations or anything said about these subjects during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. Everyone attending the executive session should treat the information shared or discussed as confidential and should not reveal it to persons not in attendance at the executive session. No decision may be made in the executive session. All right, everybody, we're going to return into regular open session, and the next item on the agenda is agenda review. Is there a motion?
Move to approve the agenda that's published.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda as published. Any discussion? Let's vote.
Phil,
Yes.
Josh,
Yeah.
Owen,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Derek,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Jennifer.
Yes.
All in favor.
Thank you. We are going to now talk about the superintendent's budget reductions update. So Dr. Morlock's going to present to us what he has so far, and we will be able to interact with him and discuss amongst ourselves what he has found so far. Dr. Morlock?
Thank you, Chair Traeger, members of the board. I think you also have a paper copy. I'll make this a little bit larger for those folks like myself that cannot see at that size. I need it to be a little bit difficult. So let me go backwards. In our last meeting, which seems like a lifetime ago, but I think it was just a few days ago, I had brought a list and we had discussed as a board, and that's on your last page of this document, the same things that we had talked about before. So what I did was I took each one of these items and we put them into this chart that's on your thing, and I'll explain each one of them, and so I'll make sure that also that our audience can see them easily. So I just wanted to show you that these are the things that were on that same sheet. I just moved them into some boxes. I did consolidate some. In the time since we were last all together, we've been working on several items to get some kind of estimates to know what we're looking at. So in the first one, first box was about preliminary staffing exercise. So on Tuesday, yesterday? Wow. It's
Yesterday.
It's
Yesterday.
Unlike my shirt, it is no picnic to figure this out. So it was yesterday. We met with all of our principals, and we went through an exercise where we gave kind of a general set of goals for them to get to in terms of reducing staff, consolidating, figuring out those numbers. And so with that in mind, at that point, we were able to, or they came in at, as they reconfigured their schools or tried to figure out how they can consolidate grade levels, they were able to get to 29 licensed FTE and approximately 41 if you were to do that for classified. So those numbers not exact because we could not get quite to the goal. I had asked them to get to a goal of a larger number. As you can see, 8.8 is still quite a distance away from the 5.3 that we have identified so far. But that was our first swing at it. We're also then individually meeting with principals over the next couple of days to go over their staffing sheets to look at other opportunities and see where they are. The challenge is we have different kinds of positions in different schools, and so how do they all fit together? I'll come back to that in a second around the title funding and what have you. But that was our initial shot at that. The other one that came up on the list was about DO staffing and administrative reductions. In our initial, I'm calling them level 1 reductions of the first ones, we were able to come in about 21%, so about 1.14 million in reduced district positions, and that's positions that go across the district, that might be in the central office, that might be maintenance, technology, all those things that are part of district operations. And so we were able to identify at least those numbers for them. The school level ones are a little bit different because we're still working on what our schools might look like, what they would be organized like, so we've not identified any of the school level administrative positions at this time. Another one that came up, of course, was about transportations and reductions. We wanted to try to figure out ways to reduce overall busing costs by consolidating routes. We were also tasked with looking at a 4-day school week. So maybe a couple of those numbers. If we reduce the number of routes from 42 down to 31, that saves, in year one, it saves about $322,000. So that's about an 8.3% reduction. So again, going from 42 down to 31. If we go to a 4-day school week, but we remain with the 42 routes that we currently have, that actually increases our costs by about $100,000. It goes up about 2.6%.
Wow.
If we go to a 4-day school week, we go down to the proposed 31 routes, then we find a savings of nearly $400,000. So it's about a 10.3. Remember that the just leaving schools 5 days a week is an 8.3%, 322,000, and a 4-day would be about 399,000. Okay. The challenge in the 4-day ones is that it's much more difficult to staff with drivers because the drivers are now seeing about a 20% reduction in their overall salary and benefits. So that can be hard, and that was a caveat put on us by the bus company that we have fewer routes, fewer days, and so it may be harder for them to staff. Go ahead. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm confused about, so at a 4-day school week, so we currently are using 42 routes, correct? But if we cut a day out, we still have an increase of 100,000?
Yeah, there are other things that go into all of those costs. You have a daily rate, right? So it's, and I can get you all the rest of the numbers that go into those. This is the executive summary of the executive summary, but that's the, in the study, that's what they've come up with.
So it's cheaper to run bus routes 5 days a week with 42 routes?
Fewer hours a day as well,
Okay.
right? So when you're going to a 4-day week, you have a longer day, and even in the time that they're either deadheading, which means they're waiting by the side of the road, waiting for the route to start, or other ones, it ends up actually increasing your costs over time. Okay. Our food service was another area we have met with Sodexo a couple of times. We'll continue to meet with them. The costs in our staffing have gone up. So in your actuals from the 1920 school year, you were budgeted, or your actual came in at $891,000. In 22-23, it had increased to 1.5 million. And then in your adopted budget for this school year, it's at 1.67 million. So your costs have gone up significantly there. In 3 years, the general fund's actually transferred 400,000 to the food service fund, and it's still projected to have a negative balance near 600,000 as of this coming June. So we're going to have to make significant either staffing changes to the model, or we're going to have to budget a larger number for that one. So that is not included in our 8.8. That would be another part we'd have to figure out where that comes from. So we're still doing study with them. I will be bringing the contract for this next year. It's a 1-year contract for Sodexo. They only have one staff member who manages the program. All the rest of those are our staffing costs and, of course, increase in some food costs. But those are some significant numbers. So we're still trying to figure out where those all come from, what the staffing looks like. Are there model changes that we can do to still feed all the students their breakfast and lunch and make it in a more efficient way?
How does increase in meal costs from families factor into these numbers?
How do you mean?
Like, we raise the cost of what families pay for.
Well, actually, coming on to this next school year, the community will qualify for what's called the community eligibility provision, meaning the CEP, which means that all students will be able to eat for free. So all those costs for meals will be reimbursed by the federal government.
Oh.
right? So we're still looking at how that all goes. So right now, if you remember during the pandemic, everybody qualified.
Yes.
Because it was just too hard to count.
Yes.
And now, post-pandemic, people had then had to reapply for their free and reduced meals. Some students got them, of course, some people paid full freight. And now the bar for CEP by the feds has been lowered to 25%. That means that Silverton and the outlying communities now qualify for the CEP, which allows us to then provide the food for free. You still have to staff it, right? So you still have a staffing conversation we have to have, but in terms of the...
So staffing is the majority of this?
Correct.
Yeah.
But in terms of the reimbursement on a per meal basis, we will just be counting people as they come in, and we're then able to reimburse each one of those meals, whether it's breakfast or lunch or both.
So it would help offset some of that.
Say again?
That does help offset some of the,
It does help a little bit, yes. You know, sometimes people find that it costs them a little bit more to do that, and I think it really just comes down to how they staff it and how they operate it. You know, there are differences between having a fully cooked breakfast and a grab and go, for instance, right? There are different ways to do some of those things. So that's part of the conversation that we're having with Sodexo. They understand what we're talking about, and so they'll help us at least look at ways for us to change the model to still to be able to provide food, and now that we're able to provide it at no cost to families for any student who wants it. But there's still some work to do around that. So I wanted to highlight that because that's been in the budget, and we've been kicking the can down the road. So we want to make sure that we do some kind of adjustment, whether it's adjust with the budget number that we've got it at, or we figure out a way to adjust staffing, probably both.
Dr. Morlick, do you
Yes.
know, will that program, as far as the reimbursement, will that extend indefinitely into the future, or does it have a potential sunset date? Like, federal government's plan on doing it through like 2026 and then going back?
I wish
You know.
I wish I knew what the federal government was ever going to do on any given day. But it's basically based, so we knew they might be moving that CEP number down, right? And that's something that, honestly, it feels like a political win for both sides of the aisle. Like, you know, big business gets to sell food and the kids get to eat. So it seems like a really win-win. So I think that this is probably part of that ratcheting down. We have no guarantees for that. And it can change if your eligibility profile goes up, that is, that your income goes up. But considering that it was where we are now, and then that bar was lowered to 25, you know, they use that as an easier method, and frankly, it actually takes less effort for us to just count them coming in rather than taking in money and doing all the rest of those things. So we're always hopeful that they're going to go to that model, because the students who are going to eat are going to eat. Those who aren't are going to bring their own lunch, they're going to bring their own lunch. And so I think that's, I'm hopeful that it'll continue to stay at that point, and it's a nice change to go back to that. I know during the pandemic we fed a lot of people, and so I'm hopeful that it'll stick around. There's a lot of advocacy around that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great news.
All right. We also, I brought a few of those about real property, and so we can, we had some conversation tonight, and then later on in the meeting, there may be an opportunity if you want to consider us looking at property to sell. So there's some pending sales. I do want to highlight for the community at large that these processes take a long time, so they're not likely to be part of this budget building. It is an opportunity to look ahead several months, though, and say if this were to come through, just because of the need to divide property and get it sold, get it appraised, all the rest of those things, that we're not going to get it in time for this budget building. And of course, bird in the hand, you want to make sure that that all happens, so you can't count on revenue that doesn't exist yet. So it is an opportunity for you to look forward into the budget year and make some other choices as it comes in, whether that's shoring up your revenue, your ending fund balance, looking at some recall of staff, other kinds of opportunities. You can look at all of those things in the future. But I did put it on here. We have done that research, and we know it'll take minimally maybe 6 months. We're not quite sure how long because of the division of the property and things of that nature. All right, one of the other things we put on the list as well was to consolidate Title I grant resources at elementary level. We did that and more. We're going to figure out, we've actually started the work on braiding, what they call braiding resources. So we've got Title I, which is around the same students for the free and reduced. We have Title III, which are our ELD students, English learning students, and the early literacy grant. So there are some ways for us to braid those three funding opportunities to provide either intervention services and or staffing at elementary levels, right? So we're going to be using those. I know we have some of that money this year that currently goes to middle school. We'll move that down to elementary to try to focus on that in terms of trying to keep our class numbers as low as possible. I put in here that says no savings, but a redeployment of funds to provide staffing. So it's gathering it up over here and putting it over there towards something that we're taking away. So it's not a savings, but it is a redeployment of those same resources to try to focus on what we're doing, which is try to keep our class sizes as low as possible, provide the best instruction we can for students and things of that nature. So it doesn't look like it's a savings necessarily, but it is a redeployment more focused on specifically on the classroom level. That is the same for our SIA, that's the Student Investment Account plan. Our plan actually is broad enough that we're able to allows us to shift some of those dollars to keep class sizes lower in order to support reading and other intervention supports. So one of the allowable uses for SIA, of course, is class size reduction. Our plan has been specifically focused on improving reading scores and things of that nature. We happen to know that smaller class sizes helps reading greatly, because when you have fewer kids that you're working with. So we know that there are some ways for us to redeploy some of the SIA and focus more of that that we've done on other things on keeping our class sizes and our workloads as low as possible. I put that one as well, no savings, but redeployment. Again, these are about trying to find ways to save jobs, to put them toward the most critical resources we can. So we're just redeploying the money that has come in. I know that you've heard from a number of folks about the move from a block schedule back to a 7-period day at the high school and the move up from a 6-period to a 7-period at the middle school. And this, again, when we're talking about mathematics and how this all works as far as the number of available staff for students, when we're looking at reductions anywhere between 18 to 20%, every kind of percentage point that we can bring down makes a big difference. And so as far as it comes down to limiting class sizes, if you're talking about this, again, 18 to 20% licensed RIF, we'll be able to lessen that by increasing the number of sections, right? Because right now you have the number of sections available based on 3/4 of your teaching staff being available. When you go up to that 0.85, when you move up another 10%, it doesn't just add 10%, it adds a whole other set of sections. So you've got more sections that you can offer. So when you have that many teachers, if you have fewer of them in the classroom with students directly, it's fewer of those classes, numbers go up. Go ahead.
Well, so this is a subject that we have received some feedback on, and I'm just curious if you're able for the public to put a quantified dollar kind of savings number to that.
No, but let me get back to you on that, because
Okay.
we're working on what that means in terms of the number of sections. So we just worked with our principals yesterday, but we're meeting with them. I'll get you those, and we'll have that in our next update. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it just has to do with the number of sections available, but yeah, we can do that. Same thing with middle school, going from 6 up to 7 gives additional number of sections, so as you reduce the number of teachers that you have available, of course, by going to one more section, it does shorten your class, but it also gives you fewer kids per room. So I'll do some calcs on getting those numbers in for you. Another one that I know we've gotten significant feedback on was, and you asked for us to at least look at it, so if we suspend operations at smaller schools, these are approximate numbers and just an exercise. I want to be clear, we haven't made decisions. These are things that were put on the table, so we want to make sure that people understand what they are worth. If we looked at suspending the operations at both Prattam and Evergreen, those are our current staffing amounts. We have a 0.25 admin at Prattam. We have 3.2 total. We have more than this number of people because they have work fewer hours. But if you add them all together, the total number of hours would be a 3.2 FTE. And the same thing for licensed, a 3.8 FTE. At Evergreen, 0.3 in admin, 2.5 in classified, and 4.7 in licensed. The utilities, we're estimating at about 35,000-ish for both of them. If you were to then, and this would not be a complete reduction of all of the staff, we would be able to RIF the admin portion of that, that's the 0.55. You would RIF some of the classified, it would not be all of them, and some of the licensed, because you'd be putting the kids in other schools. That allows you to reconfigure and have more efficiency in the classes that you have. And we estimate that you'd save about 73% on utilities and maintenance. You still have to mow the lawn, take care of the windows if they get broken, make sure the water doesn't freeze in the pipes, things like that. So there are still some costs in maintaining a building that you own. And so that total could come out to about $919,000 is what we've estimated would be a savings if you closed those two schools. In the reorganization, as we had talked about for K-8 schools, if we looked at consolidating grade levels, so leaving them all open, but then readjusting which grades go to which school, we have not had time to calculate what that would look like. That there is some efficiency in there. There are some programs we may be able to consolidate a little bit just in terms of looking at numbers. And so we will get more information as we continue to work through that. I wanted to let you know that we're still reviewing those. Each one of these things has taken quite a bit of time with all of our staff, so we're trying to get through as many as possible. This is the next kind of level of ones we will look at. The same thing when we talked about consolidating and reorganizing what are called specials. Specials are classes like library and music and PE. There are some challenges in consolidating those because we also do have, in an elementary schedule, as part of the scheduled day, elementary licensed staff have a 30-minute prep period. And in order to do that, we have to have places for the students to go. And so that's often your specials are the places they go. They go to the library, or they're with their counselor, or they go to the to music or to PE and what have you. And it's also not bad to have some music and some joy and some PE to run around. So those are also good things, so not just for that. But that is an important part of scheduling, and that is a challenge to make sure that we have enough of that time that allows for the scheduling of the prep period, as well as offering music and PE and library, sort of thing like that. So we're still looking at what that would look like. Yesterday, when we were working with our principals, we gave them some goals to try to reach, like here's what we want to do for staffing goal. And in order to do that, we had all these little weird, like we got a .1 over here and a .2 over there. I was like, well, they don't have a helicopter. It's going to be hard to go from Scotts Mills to Central Howell in 10 minutes. So there are some things we have to still work through on. What's the staffing ratio look like? What can we actually do? What do we imagine we'd like to do, and what can we actually do just in terms of stretching staff, or where do they go? Are they 1 day a week? Are they part of every day of the week, or what have you? So there's still quite a bit of work to do in that one. So that one in your sheet says pending additional review. Other reductions, we are reviewing all of our leases, supplies, materials, projects that we can place on hold, release, defer. All of those things are still being looked at, so I don't have any numbers for you there. But that's part of our budget review process. As a reminder, we're still trying to also put together a budget for a budget committee that we have to work on as far as meetings go, and so we're trying to get those numbers. So as soon as we get these landed, we'll also be able to provide you with where we've made some reductions in those areas, but those are also still in review.
One specific question, Dr. Joe, about
Yeah.
the specials. Some folks have asked about contract extension on the edX services. Do you know if that was terminated or canceled, or is it ongoing?
We're ongoing, but that has nothing to do with specials.
Oh, it's not? Okay.
Nope. Yeah, that is actually a professional development, staff development,
Gotcha.
curriculum work, yeah. So that's still in process.
In process to no longer have a contract with them?
If that's possible. You currently have a signed contract.
Okay.
But there are two parts to it. Remember, there's a contract for the services, and there's also the things that you do when you sub people out, and you actually spend the time to do that. So there are multiple parts to it. So the one part that most people are worried about, at least that they're thinking about, that's still in process.
Okay.
Any other questions for the update?
With your numbers here on your school suspension of operation at a couple of schools, I take it there's room at other buildings for those students?
Yes.
But really to know the actual cost of, the cost savings, we'd have to know how many of those staff would be filtered into those other schools to
Correct.
provide. So we're
Right.
not there yet.
No.
No.
I wanted to give you at least a rough order of magnitude, so you would know sort of what the ballpark we're looking at.
Right.
This has to come back to, again, we have to look at class sizes, where they go, where do the students come from, how they're bused, those kinds of things. So some of those don't make as much sense. But this is probably, you'd be in this arena between $800 to $1 million in a differential.
So if the numbers that you came up for that $919,000, that's if, no, I guess that would say we would RIF essentially 9.5 staff to do that, because I've got 7.5 and 7, so 14.5 between the two schools, and we would take off essentially 10 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Correct? That's
Correct.
how we got that number?
Mhm. Yeah, that's both schools.
Does that mean logistically or practically speaking, then, like you would have potentially kids that are, say now at Prattam, could potentially be out at Bethany, or obviously they wouldn't all go to the same place. I would assume that they would filter into open classes at different schools, correct?
Right, and we would try to do that as geographically as possible. People still want to go to other schools in between, and that's possible. When you look at the different class sizes, so if, let's say we'll have, and I won't tell you what school it is because I can't remember, but we have got a kindergarten that might have 14 in it. Well, we're not going to probably be able to afford 14 anymore, so we have to find a place where, can we add, 6 or 8 or 10 to that classroom? And so again, also kindergarten numbers are hard because we don't know who's coming until about the 4th day of school. We finally did, oh, hey, it's the first day of school. Well, it's 4th day of school, but thanks for coming. So we don't know those numbers until a little bit later. You know what I'm talking about, right? Okay, thank you. So those numbers are very fluid. We just use this year's current enrollment for kindergarten to estimate next year's. So we just say, well, it'll be the same. It could be higher or lower, but yeah, the strategy is then you put them into the schools to balance off your school numbers. It also allows you to have fewer blends. So from an instructional standpoint, it's really hard to teach a blend. We have some teachers doing amazing things teaching 3 grade levels. So if you think about your lowest level kindergartner in a class with your highest level second grader, that's a huge range of instruction. So when you reduce blends, you actually do reduce stress on the teacher. So even if she's teaching a second and third grade blend, there's a range between the ages of those children and the skills of those children. So there are some other benefits just in terms of having a straight grade, like I'm just teaching second grade this year. Some people love blends, and that's great, and they're magic, but there are some other ways to help consolidate. And that's why we also looked at the other one, hang on one second, the one that we did not yet price out, which is the reorganizing elementary schools. So if you left them all open, but we just moved from grade levels, you had some concentrated. There are places to say, this is our K-1 school because we're just going to get them started, and we can do all of those things. So that's the next thing that we'll look at, because we may still be able to generate a similar savings, but leaving the buildings open, but you just have a different configuration. Somebody else? Go.
Yeah, question, looking at the suspending operations at the smaller schools, the staff that were outlined there as far as RIF, is that number included in the very first bullet point on page 1, or that would be in addition to?
In addition. What we have on this sheet right now equals about 7 million. So we're still easily 2 million short. So when we go back to the top and we talk about yesterday's exercise as we were trying to staff schools and look at what we thought we could do, and every principal's working on their own and our groups are working together, we did not come up with enough. We came up with 5.3. So we have lots of work still left to do to get to that next level. Now, some of these haven't been priced out, so those will add to it. But we do have to, and that's why we'll work on this next thing about grade level configuration as the next update for you to also consider if that can generate some savings. That may be a better route for us to take. None of these are good choices. I get it, and I just am trying to give you an update of the scope. None of these are things that people want or like to do, but there are some necessary things we have to do to get to that place, and we want to get something together for your budget. So
Well, and I just want to state this again, because I think I asked the question last time, but the reorganization, the potential reorganization
Sure.
option, that could be changed down the road depending on what happens in future years.
Yeah. Yeah, and the reason I didn't actually put close schools and I put suspend, you could suspend them for a year, get back in the zone, and then reopen and do as you've done before. There are lots of options for you to do that. You have to have the budget to be able to afford to do it, and you make a plan for it, but none of these changes have to be permanent. And as we've talked about before, part of this is about getting ourselves back in line, right? We got to pay off what we owe for this year to make sure we're covered, get a healthy ending fund balance, have an operational budget, and you will grow back. I know it's hard to see that right now, but when you prune a tree back, eventually it does come back, it does bloom again. And that will happen, and it takes a little bit of time, but we have to create some discipline right now to get us back to that place. And that's what this is. So none of these things have to be permanent. And I think that's really important for people to know. And we do have to go through some changes, but we also have to kind of right size for where we are. We have some decreasing enrollment statewide. We have funding that is only so much that we're going to get, so we have to be able to pay for what we can afford. And yes, some of these things you could just undo, say, well, we made it for a year. That was terrible, so let's go back to doing this other way, or let's figure out another strategy to fix this. Yeah, and that's why I've used the word suspend instead of close. I think it's actually probably more closer to where you want to be. Like this is something we're going to do temporarily, and that's why we're looking at the reorganization. Let's see if we reorg. Maybe that also is terrible, right? Maybe it's just, it's bus mayhem and parent pickup craziness and all this stuff, and it ended up being a terrible choice, and you had to get through it for a year because this is what you could afford, and then you can go and figure out what's next. And that's the opportunity you have with your next superintendent to work through those things and develop a budget and what that will look like.
And one important piece we learned from this, I call it a progress report, is basically what we have here, what we know so far down this, that a lot of the more substantial ways of savings have been monetized on here, and we still aren't there. So it's like, unfortunately, there's not going to be a lot of choices at the end of the day.
That's correct.
When we get those numbers.
Yeah, and it's, part of this is you have to go through the exercise like we did with our principals yesterday, because we need their expertise to say, here's kind of how you operate this school, and this is what I've got. But when you get down to the numbers, like, well, that's not enough. So now we have to go back to the drawing board. What's our next goalpost we have to reach? And we also have to do some tinkering as well. Like, are there ways, when I talked about consolidating the title funds, are there ways for us to braid those funds in such a way that we can pay for certain things this way, which then allows us to move our staff around in a different way? But there's still quite a bit of more work to do in terms of what the reductions will be and how we get there.
On the braiding in those funds, a lot of that title stuff is kind of record-keeping nightmares already. How much is that going to be compounded by, I'm thinking of when the title audits come in and stuff, how much hassle is that going to be?
Oh, it'll be plenty of hassle. Yeah. That's part of the benefit and the challenge of receiving federal funds is that there are reporting requirements. And that's, I think part of this is, though, that we have to make sure we have a plan that makes sense, and then we say, here's how we've used these funds. In some ways, it actually may simplify some things, because say we're targeting it on this program, doing this one with these students in these schools. So I'm always a little bit Pollyanna, or hopeful at least, that maybe we'll simplify it. But yeah, the reporting is always challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah. The age of accountability.
You said that this represented on page here was about 7 million in savings. So we got about another 1.8 we need to find.
Yeah, and these are rough estimates, so I would say we'll probably have to go a little further till we actually figure out what real costs are. So when you're looking at, in the upper right-hand corner, the estimated level 1 savings from that staffing exercise, when we look at that 29, that's based on the average salaries of those lower on the seniority list, the newer staffing, right? So their average is lower. We have not calculated in yet the cost of unemployment, which is I think it's about 26,000. Is it?
It'll
be 21,000 per
21,000.
person, if they make 60,000 or more a year. So that will come, unfortunately, back to us in the form of a bill.
Right, so we do have to think about that planning.
So the timeline for the decision is exactly when?
Well, we're going to get some more of these things together. It'll actually come at the time of budget time, right? We're going to come and say, here are what we have for our reductions. You know, we talked earlier about trying to get this out by May 17th. That is slipping away quickly. We're trying our best to get these done. We do meet with our classified association tomorrow to go over a similar document that we had done for our licensed staff, which is around, here's our process for reductions in force, that we have to follow a contract, and here are the ways that are done. Both contracts are very different, and so we've got a staffing document of that. So we'll go through these as soon as we can.
I guess for clarifying why I'm asking is because, you know, particularly a couple of these options, it would, for me to make a well-educated decision, would probably take a 1 to 3 month community involvement process, plus a bunch of other background research to make sure I'm not missing anything. But however, those decisions, looking at these numbers, affect the RIFs. And to my knowledge, we don't have time to do the full research. To
do
make
research
our
on
RIF
what?
Excuse me, Doctor?
I'm sorry, what was the research on?
Well, we're talking about closing 2 schools or maybe something else or others or consolidation. For example, if we're to assume that all 144 of these kids, because right now Pradham has 67, Evergreen has 77 as of May 1st. Robert Frost doesn't have room for all of them, the surrounding schools. So I guarantee you're going to lose some of these kids. They will disappear, which means a decrease in revenue. There's added costs and unintended consequences that will happen, whether any school we make. There's going to be unintended consequences for the RIFs. And so it's like, but I understand that, like, that number of, you know, almost $1 million is a lot of teachers' jobs. So are we saying that we're not making a decision on those schools until we get to the budget period? Or are we trying to make that decision by next Friday?
I don't know if we'll have all the information available for you to make that by next Friday. I don't know if we'll have all the other staffing things ready. We can certainly target that as a date.
But you kind of need that information to make your decision, correct?
Yeah, I need to know how we're going to do. I mean, part of it is, if you look at that, what we do here, 9.5. So that 9.5, all the way at the upper right-hand corner, we'd have to add that already to those numbers and go more. So our budget document has to say, here's where we are. This is what we could spend on salaries and benefits, right? So that 29, we take it to 39, right? So that's where we go. So how do you do those? Well, there may be only a certain number of configurations you can do to staff on that number. Because if you look over the rest of the document, you can only save so much on paper, on electricity, on plumbing, on district office staffing, on mowers, on gasoline. At some point, when the majority of your budget is staffing, the only way to get there is staffing. So if we decide that we don't want to do the other ones, then we'll have to figure out how the staffing across all these schools. We still have to cut the same number of people, right? We still have to reduce the same number. So if it's not something that you wish to do in terms of reconfiguring or doing the other ones, that's less important than knowing how many staff we actually have in order to staff the schools and make them work. So the decision to make those suspensions or not is less critical than it is to say, here's what the number of staffing needs to be. This is one of our options to get there. This is one way to do that. This is one opportunity that we imagine you could save 10. I mean, you could save the cost of 10 staffing positions. Does that make sense?
And one thing I think we need to keep in mind is, and to your point, Josh, as far as lost students or whatever, there's not going to be any guarantees on that. I mean, there's no way to forecast that, really, as far as by any of these actions. I mean, any of these actions could be reflected in people deciding their kids go elsewhere or whatever, but we have really no way of accurately predicting that, no matter what it is that we cut. Because everything, I mean, there's gonna be people that are gonna look at each of these and say, you know, make their decisions for their family and whatever. And I'd be chasing a target that doesn't exist, basically, trying to figure that out.
Yeah, I think to Josh's point, the gravity of potentially closing school with very limited to no
Right.
time for public input because of the deadline that we're facing. I think that's the part that we're, you know, obviously wrestling with, and the number of staff. However, to your point, these are the mechanisms and levers that we have in place to meet the 8.8, and so it sounds like there isn't time to go into those deeper conversations and seek significant public input by your assessment and timeline.
Time's running very short.
Yeah, I guess I remind that Dr. Joe was saying suspend operations,
Sorry,
not close.
suspend.
You know, and when I see massive cuts, if you just say, wow, 15, 18% staffing cut across the board, you know, some of these smaller buildings, is there enough people in the building to even operate the school? You might get something like that. So I don't know. I guess I'm looking forward to the rest of your research.
Me too.
Well, not really looking forward to it, but you know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It-
we'll find other, we're going to look at all avenues
Yeah.
to do this.
Yeah.
This is the one that we were able to do
Yep.
right now, because this was actually a slightly simpler way to look at it, but the reconfiguration also has its challenges, right? When you start putting
Yep.
all of those
Yeah,
in
it
there, and
is.
then you have to consider what's our longest bus ride, and, you know, is that too long for certain age levels? And so you have the, it's not just moving people around. There are all these other things that kind of go into it. And do you have the capacity in parent drop-off and pickup, and do you have enough capacity to get breakfast done on time so they can get there on the bus and get in, because the bus has to leave to be able to pick up the other ones? And so you have a certain amount of turnaround time, whether that's a half hour or 45 minutes. So all these other little details that go into each one of these changes is a significant shift for the school, even if it doesn't look big on paper. It's not as easy as moving the horses around to different stables. There are all these other kind of things that happen within that school, and each one of those changes has a domino effect. Just reducing the amount of one of the specials by 0.1 will have an effect in the class, in everybody's classroom, in everybody's school. So each one sort of cantilevers on the other, if that makes sense. And so we have to be cautious. We can't just walk in and go, oh, we're just going to wipe this out. That's it. That's easy. It's not. There are lots of things that are dependent upon that.
And I do think it's important that we remember, as you pointed out, that hopefully not too much of this is permanent, and that, you know, that we have, as we get things right, and, you know, if, and a huge if a building is suspended operation, that's a whole heck of a lot different than boarding it up and closing it. And the same thing with recall on staff and things like this, as more money becomes available, but we got to get there first.
We talked briefly a little bit about using targeted furloughs potentially as a cost-saving measure. Last meeting, not ideal, right? But it is another lever to pull. I didn't say anything, you know, talking about this, maybe using some of those to potentially offset some of the staff cuts, right? That if we could utilize those at roughly 160,000 a day, can we offset some of to keep our staff? You know, like if you look at what we've got here saying in suspending operations at smaller schools, it's $900,000 in staffing costs, or 800 plus in staffing costs. You know, you could take 8 furloughs or 7 furloughs to help offset that, so we can retain our staff.
I fear if we furlough many more, they'll just quit.
Well, I'm saying using targeted furloughs. I'm not saying
I know
30
that.
furlough days.
I know.
I'm
but
just saying, if you look at if you add this, but in order to keep the staff,
I understand what you're
I
saying.
guess
It's a good,
preservation of staff is where I'm
it's a
trying
good
to.
point.
It's a lever. It's not the be all and end all, but if
But
everyone's on the
next year's
table.
going to be so hard. I'm thinking about it in my head with, I don't let them get to the furlough question, and because it plays into your point, Aaron. I'm like looking at like just because he brought it up as an individual school, taking 7 and cutting them in half, like losing half your teachers in a school, what that does to the kids, how they'll behave, and then the existing teachers that are still they'll have a harder workload, and then ask them to furlough on top of it would just be like double kick.
Can we use a furlough to
But
retain
I'm
that, is
sure
what I'm saying.
to answer Aaron's question, Doc,
Sure, I can answer it. The only things that we have control over are in this document. So furloughs are something that, A, have to be negotiated, and B, you're asking your staff to take a pay cut at the same time. That's not something that I have put into our planning at this point. Our planning is to figure out how to get to that budget. If that conversation does come up, then we'll talk about it then, but these are the only things we have control over right now. And so I can't focus on the what-ifs and the maybes. There's just not enough time for that, and frankly, those are other negotiating conversations, and A, they're not guaranteed, and B, I think a bit to that point too, we're gonna create additional stress, and then we're gonna ask them to take less. So that's a hard conversation to have.
Well,
So right now, I'm focused on specifically what we can do, which are, we can make these reductions. If that conversation comes later on, that's okay, but I'm not building a budget around that at all. I'm building a budget around, here are the things that we have complete control over.
That makes sense to me. Thank you
Yeah.
for explaining that.
And I think, as Josh pointed out, it looks like, I mean, some of it, we're sitting here thinking, don't know how, but we are getting there, and hopefully these ways, as you mentioned, that we can control, will get there. But the double whammy of, we know there's gonna be RIF, that's a given.
Yeah.
And with RIF, by definition, we're asking less people to do more. And I think you sell the farm before you ask people that you're already asking to do more to take home less pay. I just don't think you can do that, so.
I've got a follow-up question related to edX. You may not have the numbers. I know folks that I've spoken to, a lot of teachers want that gone, and I know we have a contract with them. Is there any discussion, or do we know what it would cost to break that contract? Just, again, looking at the gravity of where we're at, if that program were to continue and we didn't really hammer down what it's costing us to get rid of it, and we're asking so much of our teachers, I think we need to really get that locked down and determine if we can get out of it, and if there's associated costs. So that would be something I would really like to have that information as soon as possible.
Just to be clear, so everybody knows the number, it's 159,000 total. Right, so even if we had to pay the whole thing, that's one thing. We paid half, we paid less than half, we paid zero. There seems to be a lot of misinformation around how much it costs. It's 159,000, and so if it had an extra zero, I'd be really fired up, right? But it's one piece, and I know there are associated costs with it, right? There are costs that you do for subbing people out. Those are the things we wouldn't be doing anyway. We don't have the funds for that part of it. So even if we had to pay the contract fully, it's a very small drop in this bucket. Is it a drop? Yes. Is it important? Also yes. Is it money we're chasing after? Absolutely yes. But because there's a legal contract behind it, we have some other work we have to do in the background. But I'm glad you asked that question, because I do want people to know it's 159,000.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because
Yeah.
I know there's been a lot of conversation around it, and so just to kind of set things clear, we know it's 159,000 until the contract expires, so I didn't want that to get lost, because that
Yeah.
was.
No, I appreciate that. And it's as anybody who's been in the legal process knows, it takes time. And so we're still working through it.
All right, thank
Yeah,
you.
You're welcome. Any other questions on this?
I just
Right.
appreciate the maintenance and utilities savings costs estimate. Thank you for putting that out there, because I think it's just a good number to know.
I know it's a lot of work to get those numbers.
It is, yeah.
It is gonna
I
be a lot
appreciate the
more
document.
work.
I guess for people, this is a working document that you're still working on, so there's nothing
Right.
hard, fast, decided upon. You're just
Nope,
No.
this is why this is a discussion and not an action
Progress
item.
report.
These are just our current progress and update. I wanted to come back after that you had given me direction in terms of the list. I wanted to bring back that list and show you what our progress was on it. As soon as we can figure out about how much more time, I know the next 2 days, we're also continuing to work with our staff to figure out where the next things are. As far as some of the ones that are still pending review, those are pending as we're working on them. I apologize for not getting the document to you earlier. Frankly, we are working on it until about 5:25, I think, when I sent it to her to print. So Debbie has weight on me. So we're not holding them back from you. We're literally working on them up until the moment so we can get them out to you. Because we want to make sure that they're as accurate as possible, because we know once they go out, then to try to correct information that is incorrect, it takes a lot of effort. So,
And to that point, I just want to appreciate, Kim was at work until 9:30 last night,
Yeah.
I think, and
Mhm.
she told the story that you fell asleep at your desk yesterday or something. And so I just want to acknowledge that there's a lot of work going into this, so thank you.
yeah, people are working really hard to get it right and get it accurate. And there are just a lot of pieces to it.
So what do you need from us to help you?
If you could get Congress to pass a 36-hour workday. Just keep asking questions. As questions come in too, we don't always hear all the questions. So if you have stuff that comes up, things that you're wondering about, just get them to us so we can give you the best information. As you well know, lots of misinformation out there in the interwebs, and so we want to make sure that we give you as accurate as possible. And sometimes we just don't know because we don't know. And we'll tell you as soon as we do know. But yeah, any of that kind of stuff really helps us because it's hard to know what people are asking about. Like, we know the edX question is, but it's good for Director Foxworth to ask the question so we can talk about it here. Things like that are important for us to know.
I guess I will put you on the spot, and I apologize
ahead.
for this, but I know a lot of people want to know. We're still trying to beat Salem Kaiser for our RIF list,
Right.
correct?
We're always trying to beat somebody, right? It's always a competition. We're not going to be able to get to that date, I don't think. That's the 17th, which is
Next Friday.
next Friday. I don't think we'll get there. We might, but I don't think so. You remember, they've been working on
They've been,
those,
yeah,
the
all
first
year.
half of them, all year long. Right, so we do have some documents, if we can get there. We wanted to give a highlight when, like just tonight, in that upper right-hand corner. So that's the 29, and we know kind of where they are on the list. That gives an indication. They're not all the last ones, right, because there are licensure things that go in and those things, but we're trying to give people a scope of what we're working on still. If we can get a better idea on that number, great. There's a challenge in doing, do you do wave 1, wave 2, wave 3? Oh, I'm safe, no, I'm not. Oh, I'm safe, no, I'm not. Those people who were old enough, it was like waiting for your draft number to come in. or
Yeah.
not, Right, and I think that can add some anxiety as well. So I don't know if we'll get to the May 17th. That was always a goal, and I had early on stated that, of course, not because I'm competitive, but if I were, I'd want to, of course, beat the neighbor to the west, but we also have to do this right, and so there are some significant considerations to do and only so much capacity. So we'll do the best we can to get there.
Speaking of the wave idea, is that something that you're still considering, or?
Yeah, we're considering that too. We are working closely with our associations to get a feeling for how people are feeling, right? And so we may just have to make a decision, but we have to talk about those. Is this the right thing to do at this point? Yesterday's exercise really did help us get to a place where, like, okay, we know that minimally it'll be this, and are there deeper to go? So we'll have that conversation with them.
And you're meeting with classified tomorrow?
Tomorrow is classified, yeah. And we're going to go over the RIF document, the procedure document, so we all have clarity, so to make sure it matches our understanding with the contract. It's complex, but you have to do it right, and there are all kinds of rules and the way things move in and out and who can do which one and bump up and bump down. So we have to make sure all those are correct and we all have agreements on, because when we get down to it and we have to make decisions, we want to make sure that we agree on what the words mean.
Sounds like it's a little more complex than the certified, no?
Different.
Different,
Just
yeah.
different.
Just different.
So you just have to have two sets of
Right.
procedures, got it.
They're very different contracts and very different kinds of work, and so they're just different.
First of all, I really appreciate what you've got here and how it's spelled out for us and everything, and keeps us abreast to it. And what do you anticipate, the next regular board meeting or something in between, or do you even have a guess?
Yeah,
as
our
far
next
as
regular board
another
meeting
update?
is Monday. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
It's
Yeah, it's on Monday.
I don't even know what day of the week it is now, so we're good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Monday we can give you another
Yeah.
update. I think we should have an update every time, whether I have a lot to share or only a little to
Whatever
share.
it is, okay.
At every meeting, and then we have some additional special meetings that we're trying to schedule as well. So
Right.
we'll continue to do updates that way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm like you, I can't keep track of
yeah.
where.
So we will, yeah, we'll always have an update on each board meeting's agenda, just even if it's a short one, or here's what
Yeah.
progress has been made. Those ones that are still under review, those are the ones we're gonna try to get hammered out here in the next couple of days.
One kind of additional comment, and I think it was the last meeting, we had a conversation, you mentioned the trade-offs, and one of the things I was looking at here is just the transportation, going from the 5-day to a 4-day, and it looked like, you know, the reduction in routes, keeping the 5 days, roughly 322, and then going to the 4-day, there's a savings of just under 400. As we continue conversations, I'm curious about the feedback from the associations. We're obviously talking and potentially throwing a lot of change at the district. Like, is that 77,000, which probably would fund a position, weighing that against the impact it would have on teachers having to rearrange schedules, family impact of maybe you work 5 days, and so
Yeah.
just trying to weigh that. So as you continue to have conversations, I guess my ask is just any feedback you may have for us, and then obviously for community to reach out as well, because I'm definitely curious about weighing that.
Yeah, yeah, and I was glad to see them crank this out for us, because it's really complex about the way that they do the calculations. I do think it's important to remember when you go from 5 days to 4 days, and even though we don't like to imagine that we're childcare, we are a place for people's children to be, and so that does put a
Absolutely.
burden on families. So I didn't know how much the difference would be, frankly, so there's no way for us to calculate it. So we can certainly have that conversation. The savings from going from 42 down to 31, that feels like a no-brainer to me. Like, yes, we'll have some longer rides, but at a $320,000 savings, that feels like the right one. The other one, I think, might take more community engagement, community input on that, because it could be that one. And the differential, you're right, the 70,000, I'm not sure I would weigh that against that one, but that's something that we'll bring back again, because I will need some direction in terms of which contract that we should go forward with. It won't be in the next board meeting, but it would be soon after that, because we do have to get contracts signed.
Just to piggyback on what Derek said, we do invite the feedback, and there is one email that goes to all of us. It's school-board@silverfalls.k12.or.us. It's on the website under the board page, so that's an easy way to get a hold of everybody at the same time.
Okay, that's what I have for you for tonight.
Well, thank you, Dr. Morlock. We are going to move next to a potential action item, which comes out of our executive session where we met to deliberate or conduct deliberations to negotiate real property transactions. So I am ready for a motion.
I'd like to move that we have Dr. Joe pursue the selling of the Westfield property, 13-plus acres up behind Robert Frost School.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded that we have Dr. Joe pursue selling the 13-plus acres on Westfield behind Robert Frost School. It's been moved and seconded. I think we should probably have some discussion around this.
Yeah, so I want to be clear, this doesn't mean that we are selling it, but we're taking it the next step to go into that process of getting it further evaluated. And, right, that's my understanding, is that we're pursuing this as an option. It would not hit our budget this year, but could help us down the road, correct? That's the way my understanding it. So this is not something like, oh, we're moving to sell it. We're moving to like take it the next step. So we're leaning that way. This is the way I'm understanding it,
If-
correct?
If we ended up
Yeah.
with a deal that we wanted and could sell it, it could end up adding to our reserves. It could end up
Yeah.
involving callback of personnel, that sort of thing, because depending on length of time, because there's all kinds of studies that have to go into it and everything, and dividing it, but.
And also, the idea of putting it into a fund to buy other property as
so-
well. So there's a lot of different things that could
Yeah.
happen with a sale, and we would have to talk about that as things progress.
If it gets to
My
that.
last thought on this, before I let everybody else go, is this is like, for me, like tax return money. This is a one-time check. If we do sell it, this doesn't fix our operations. It helps us to write the books a bit. We still have to fix how we do business on a regular basis. This would help to get staffing levels back up and maybe and get our savings and be cash happy, but you know, obviously, this can't happen every time we're gonna run out of assets, so.
Yeah, and I'd be, every time this piece of properties came up in discussion, whether it's long-range facilities or something, it's always been kind of deemed, it's too small to build a school, it's not a good site to build, so it's always been kind of, you know, been poo-pooed, so it kind of makes sense to move it. I don't know where the fund should go if we choose to sell. You know, it's a long-term asset, and that should be, I'd like to see that money put aside to buy another long-term asset, because someday we will need to expand our school district, so I don't want to take long-term money and convert it to short-term. Perhaps I'd like to have a lengthy discussion about that, what the proper place to do it with the funds, should we sell.
And I think just for clarification, we're talking about the space that
Yes.
does not include the fields.
No, it's
Currently.
behind the fence
Yep.
at the back of the field
And
that
then-
goes towards those new houses they just built.
It's in between the back and the new development on the
Mhm.
west side.
And then currently and historically, we haven't had any specific plans to do anything with that piece of property, which is, I think, why we're at least comfortable exploring the option to see what funds might be realized with selling it. So I think at this point, it's just an exploration to see, would it bring in significant funds, have an impact for a long-term purpose, or to help build back up some reserves.
And did we talk about the long-range facilities committee didn't ever take on the idea of building a school there seriously? It seems to be a bit too small. Am I getting that right?
On that committee, 2019, 2020, it wasn't really ever looked at seriously for any use. We were under the assumption that it wasn't great locationally, but that's also, I'll try to say, we were never focused on that during the long range particularly, so we never gave it a great look. An in-depth look never occurred on that property during long range.
All right, any other comments before we vote? I think we're ready, Debbie.
Phil,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Owen,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Derek,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Jennifer.
Yes.
All in favor.
All right, that's the last item on our list. I always pause so you can tell me if I'm wrong. Without objection, oh, we do have something?
Yes, thank you, Chair Traeger. At risk of not being on the agenda, one of the updates that we did want to share with you this evening, and with a little bit of positive news, our community is, as you know, very supportive and always looking out for our students, and very pleased to share that we have received anonymous donation to cover all of our student body funds that were negative. And all of our student body accounts are now brought up to at least a zero balance. So we are extremely thankful for our community, and just wanted to share some light after a very heavy meeting. So
I'd
thank
like
you
to
for the
lead a round of
opportunity.
applause on that. That's very cool. Thank you, anonymous donor. That's great. Thank you very much, Kim. All right, without objection, meeting adjourned.